welcome. This week we are actually studying Parshas Ki Savai. Parshas Ki Savai you can find in the book of Dvorim, the book of Deuteronomy, which is the last book of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses, chapter 26, verse 1. And the Torah starts up this week with a very special mitzvah. The mitzvah is known as the mitzvah of Bikurim. Bikurim literally means the ripe fruit. And what does the mitzvah tell us? Ve'aya ki tavo el haaretz, and it will be when you come, when you enter the land, asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha nachala, that Hashem your God gives you as an inheritance, ve'yerishto, and you take possession of it, ve'yoshavta bo, and you dwell in it. Which means in order to be obligated with the mitzvah of Bikurim, it's not enough that you're entering the land of Israel, but you have to actually conquer the land, and then you have to settle in it. This is when Bikurim starts, which, as we know from tradition, that there was 14 years that took for the Israelites to get organized in Eretz Israel in order to be able to give Bikurim. It took them 7 years to conquer the land, and yet another 7 years to divide the land between the tribes. And since the verse says, "Ve'yerishto," and you will inherit it, "Ve'yoshavta bo," and you settle and you dwell in it. So we know that this special mitzvah, the special obligation of Bikurim, is not immediately after coming into the land, which is also something very interesting in itself, as a great lesson that we shared in previous years. The Rebbe used to say that there were Jews that they already had their share in the land the first year or the second year, some had it the 4th year. Not everybody had to wait after 14 years until they get their own piece. They conquered certain pieces and they were able to get it and live in it. And even after that, you did not bring Bikurim until everybody else was settled, until everybody else got his share, and they were able to develop their own fruits in the opportunity to bring Bikurim. So then what do? Says the Torah, when a person has a field, and the field produces specifically the fruits which are the blessed fruits of the land of Israel. As we know that Israel is blessed with 7 species. That was written in the previous parashiyot. It is called the land of wheat, barley, grape, fig, pomegranate, olive oil, and honey coming out of dates. These are the 7 species which Israel is praised with. So now when a person comes into his field and he sees, for example, a beautiful fig or a beautiful ripe pomegranate. So the first thing he goes and he wraps a little band around the first fruit as a sign that this was the first ripe one. And he says that this fruit should be concentrated as Bikurim. And usually they will all gather it together and bring it up to the temple, as the verse says next, and they would bring it on the holiday of Shavuot. That was the season of Bikurim, even though you could have bring Bikurim after Shavuot as well. You didn't have to bring it on Shavuot, but that was mainly the time when people brought those special fruit baskets as a gift. So the Torah continues Velakachta mireishis kol pri adama, you take from the first of every fruit of the ground, asher tovi mi'artzecha, that you bring in from your land, asher Hashem Elokecha noisen lach, that Hashem your God is given to you, v'samto batene, and then you shall put it in a basket, ve'alachta el hamokoim asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha, and you should go with this basket to the place that God will choose to make his name rest there, which means to the temple. So when we lived in Israel and the temple was built in Jerusalem, so those fruits who were brought in the basket as bikurim were brought up to Jerusalem. That is where it was brought up. And then when it was brought up to Jerusalem, there was a whole procedure, a whole celebration. People used to join from the nearby towns and make a whole extravaganza parade, walking with the baskets on their shoulders and making their way to the temple with those fruits. What do you do when you get to the temple? Where do you deposit it at the temple? So here we have a special procedure which is described on verse 3, verse 5, verse 4, going all the way till verse 11. The procedure entailed two parts to it. Number one, you came over to the Kohen. The Kohen was the Kohen who served as the priest on those days in the temple. And you tell the Kohen to show that you are not unappreciative of that which God gives you. So you tell him a declaration. The declaration is described in verse 3. Ve'amarta ilav, you should come to the Kohen, you will tell to the Kohen, Ki igadeti hayoim laHashem Elokecha. I declare today before God, Ki bati al haaretz asher nishba Hashem la'aveseinu losens lanu. I declare today to Hashem, you God, that I have come to the land that Hashem swore to our forefathers to give us. This is the declaration. I am not ungrateful. I know I came into this land because God gave it to me. This is a short, to the point kind of statement. At that point comes verse 4 and says, Ve'lokach hakohen atene miyodecha. The Kohen takes the basket from your hand, from the end of the honor, and he places it ve'inichoi lifnei mizbach Hashem Elokecha. He places the basket now before the altar of Hashem. So it's not on the altar, it's before the altar. Once the Kohen took the basket and placed it before the altar, at that point, the owner of the basket makes another declaration, which we're going to read in a moment. And then after he makes the declaration, he takes that basket and he gives it to the Kohen, one of the gifts that the Kohen has, and the Levites have, is from that basket of Bikurim. Now, what is he saying? This is what I want to discuss tonight, is the special declaration that the owner of the basket makes when he brought the Bikurim into the temple. Very beautifully. If you have a Chumash, read on verse 5. The Torah tells us, Ve'onisa ve'omarto lifnei Hashem Elokecha. Then you means the person who brought the basket, shall call out. Calling out usually means expressing it in a raising voice, in a loud voice. And you say before God the following: Arami oived ovi. An Aramean would have destroyed my father. Who is that Aramean who would have destroyed my father? This refers to the famous Aramean called Lavan. Lavan or Arami. Lavan came from the town, from the city called Aram. And when Yaakov was by Lavan, he lived there for 20 years. And we all know the story during the 20 years, how he worked very hard for Lavan. And he wanted to marry Rachel, and then he smuggled in Leah, and then he waited another 7 years of work, and he eventually married Rachel, and they had children, and they raised a family. But as the Torah describes in the book of Bereshit, Parshas Vayetze, Yaakov was working very, very hard, no day, no night. He was constantly dealing with the elements of the frost and the heat, and yet he made sure that Lavan's possessions will be preserved 100%. A very devoted employee, to the point that Maimonides says if you want to be an honest employee, you have to follow what the Torah says about Jacob by Lavan. The way Yaakov worked to Lavan, that's how you're going to learn what it means to work for somebody else. When he left Lavan's house after 20 years, Lavan started chasing after him, and he met up with them. If you remember the story, he told them, Yesh le'el yodi lasois imochem ra. I have really in my power to do harm to you. He wanted to kill Yaakov. It's only that God told me not to do it, so you are saved. But Lavan was really in a situation, in a position, he was ready to pashat, take the life of Yaakov at that point after 20 years. And by the way, it only expressed what he thought was during the 20 years. He always had in mind to trouble Yaakov. It wasn't something new. Now that Yaakov left, and he realized that he's not going to enjoy the service of Yaakov anymore, so he went on and he expressed what he really wanted to do for him. He really wanted to get rid of him. And yet, God saved us. So this is what the person bringing Bikurim says, that what? Arami Oived Avi. There was an Aramean who would have destroyed my father. Vayered Mitzrayma. I will tell you a second story. Our father descended to Egypt, Vayogor Shom Bimsei Me'ot, and sojourned there few in numbers. As we know that when Yaakov came down to Egypt, they were only a family of 70 boys, daughter-in-laws, grandchildren, 70. We have exactly the names of all the 70 who came down to Egypt. This is discussed in the book of Bereshit again, in Parshas Vayigash. But nevertheless, Vayehi Shom Legoy Gadoil Otzum Verov. There in Egypt, our father became a nation great, strong, and numerous. A big family and a great nation of Israel, which all descended from the 70 children that Yaakov came down with. Coming down to Egypt, the guy says, verse 6, the Egyptians mistreated us, they afflicted us, and placed the hard work upon us. We called out to Hashem our God, the God of our fathers. God heard our voice, he saw our sorrow, he saw our pain, he saw our pressure. Hashem took us out of Egypt, with a strong hand, with an outstretched arm, and with great awesomeness, with signs and with wonders. Vayevienu el hamokem hazeh, and you brought us to this place, the land of Israel, a land flowing milk of honey. This declaration, which is made by the person bringing the bikurim, the words he says, is basically the centerpiece of our Passover Agada. Every year, when it comes the night of the Seder, we have an organized book called the Passover Agada, Agada Shel Pesach, which a big part in the Agada is to discuss what happened in Egypt and what happens after we came out of Egypt. So how's the Agada? What's the structure of the Agada? The structure of the Agada is mainly every single word of this what we just read, the context of Bikurim, how the person explains how difficult it was in Egypt. We have the traditions which are being expanded on those words. Like when it says, afflicted us. So the Passover Agada, it says, how were we inflicted? When it says that we were labored, so it says, how were we labored? Our sons, the kids being thrown into the Nile River. Everything that we say in the Agadah Shel Pesach is basically, as the Talmud put it together, is the expansion on the words which we just read from this week's Parsha, with the one who brings the Bikurim, expands on the experience that we had in Egypt. This is it. This is the declaration. Now, what is the story of Egypt or Lavan have to do with bringing fruit to the temple? Ma kesher, as my sister Rivki used to say, ma kesher, what is the connection? So Rashi says the connection is very simple. The whole idea of Bikurim is to mention God's benevolence and kindness. The kindness that he gave us the ability to own a share in the land of Israel, and not only own a share, but seeing the success of the produce coming out of that share that we owned. And this is what Bikurim is all about, to say what? Thank you, to express a gratitude to Hashem. So Rashi says, since Bikurim is to express your gratitude to Hashem, therefore, we are mentioning that what happened to Yaakov in the home of Lavan, that he was saved from Lavan's plot who wanted to kill him. I thank you, which was also a tremendous chesed, an unbelievable act of kindness delivered to us by God. And we also mentioned the great kindness of God saving us from the difficult decrees of Egypt and Pharaoh. So basically, in short, since we are in the mode of expressing thank you for kindness, it's necessary to mention those two acts of kindness too. What two? The one that Yaakov was saved from Lavan. Number two, that we were all saved from the hands of Pharaoh in Egypt. This is what Rashi explains. But here comes the big question. A big question. A difficult question, seemingly. Why those two? If you are standing in the temple and you are looking to express thank you for what? For God acting kindly towards you. So you're going back in history and you say, where else did God act kindly to me? So what did you come up with? The story of Yaakov being saved from Lavan and the Israelites being saved from Egypt. Hold on. What about the splitting of the sea? Wouldn't that be a nice piece and juicy act of kindness? that we had experienced coming out of Egypt? Why don't you mention that? What about the manna which was provided for us 40 years in the desert? Doesn't that deserve a mentioning or perhaps a thank you? What about the water that we were provided 40 years in a desert, known as the miracle of Miriam's well? It came because of the merit of Miriam. Doesn't that deserve a mentioning and a special recognition when you are in the state of mentioning kindness and thanking God for all the great things He does for you? What about the fact that the clouds were protecting us while we walk through the desert? We have a whole holiday called Sukkot to celebrate those miracles. You bringing Bikurim? Don't you find it necessary? Don't you find it reasonable to mention a thank you and to acknowledge the great kindness of God watching you while you were traveling through the desert, making sure that you don't get lost in the difficult elements provided by the desert? Doesn't that deserve a special thank you? If you want to talk about Yaakov and Lavan, there is a very big chapter in Yaakov's life, who he was saved by Esav. We all remember that Esav came with that plan to attack Yaakov and to basically kill him, to the point that Yaakov was actually very afraid. He was afraid. He prepared himself for this difficult challenge to meet up with a brother who wants to kill him. That's again in the book of Bereshit, Parshas Vayishlach. He davened to Hashem, save me, rescue me from the hands of my brother, from the hand of Esau. Ki yorei anoichi oisoi, I am afraid of him. Pen yovei veikani em alboni, perhaps he comes and he smites me. Yaakov says, I'm afraid. And that's why he davened. And he prepared a lavish gift. Hopefully tried to calm him down to seeing that gift. He got ready also to fight him if necessary, but he was really afraid and he was concerned. And what happened in the end? Baruch Hashem, Akol haya beseder, everything was good. God saved Yaakov from Esav's plan. Doesn't that deserve a thank you? If you are anyway discussing Yaakov's protection, Yaakov's life, does not need to be mentioned? The Jews in the desert were saved from the hands of this great warrior of Sichon, the king of Sichon, Og, the king of Bashan. These was mighty kings who came out to attack them, and God saved us. Doesn't that deserve a mentioning? We had a story in Parasha Class when the Jews were making their way to Israel towards the end, and the Amorites were hiding in the mountains with arrows ready to shoot on us when we were walking below the mountain. And the great miracle happened that a mountain across from it somehow lifted itself up from the ground, joined the other mountain, and destroyed and killed all those Amorites who were hiding in those caves. There was a special song that we sing for that miracle in Parashat Class. There's great miracles happened with unbelievable experiences, which they all deserve a proper mentioning. Chasdei Amokoin, the kindness that God provided for us. You are bringing Bikurim, and somehow, from all the great miracles that happened, what is the one who is mentioned? Yaakov being saved from Lavan and We being saved and coming out of Egypt. Why these two? This is the question. Matter of fact, we can perhaps talk a little bit about an answer and try to understand and maybe explain that really what you want to consider is the so-called the big events. The big events would be Yaakov about to be killed by Lavan. That's a big thing. As we say actually in the Passover Agada, Lavan bikesh la'akor et hakol. Lavan was looking to uproot everything. By killing Yaakov, there wouldn't be anything. So it's a big thing. It's a fundamental thing. Same thing, Yetziat Mitzrayim is a big thing. This is a major event which happened to all of Israel. We were all saved of it. And the other thing which happened along the way was basically completing the exodus from Egypt. It's as if to say the exodus was not completed without splitting the sea and providing for us during the years in the desert, making and helping us to get to the land. So perhaps you can wonder and say that this is the reason why we only mention these two. Lavan being saved by Yaakov is a big general event, being saved, saving his life from Yaakov being saved by life from Lavan. Egypt is a general story. It's not just a little story. It's a big story. And if you mention Egypt, you also, at the same time, consider the fact that the sea was split and we went to a desert. In other words, it's like all a part of that package of the Exodus. When somebody walks into the sukkah on the holiday of Sukkot, so what do we say? That this sukkah reminds us what? But the Torah tells us, Leman yedu doiroi sechem, that you build a sukkah so all the generations should know, ki basukkos oishafti as bnei Yisrael, I caused the Israelites to dwell in a sukkah, beoitzihi oisom, and I took them out to the land of Egypt. So when you look at the mitzvah of sukkah, what do you think about? You think about just the desert? What happened to us while being in the desert? No. You think about how great was the care was given to us while we made our way out of the land of Egypt. Which means, in other words, you left Egypt, you're making your way somewhere. There's a goal. What is the goal? To get from Egypt to Israel. That's the goal. And that Exodus and the journey to Israel could have been a very difficult one, could have been a very challenging one. So it comes the Torah and tells us, no, it wasn't challenging. It was a very respectful journey. They were provided with food. They were provided with drink. They were provided with shelter. So when they came to the sea opened up. I took care of them. You took care on what? You took care to make sure that the Exodus is a proper one. The Exodus, the liberation from Egypt, came in a beautiful, honorable way until they got to their next place, until they got to Israel. So the very fact that you mentioned the Exodus, it is like all-inclusive. It takes care of the whole package, and you don't need to mention the rest. That would have been a good answer, but the only problem and the only difficulty that we have is still the story of Esau. If that's the answer, you still wonder, what about Yaakov being saved from the plot of Esau? Laban wanted to kill him, and Esau wanted to kill him. So why are you making a bigger deal about the story of Laban than the story of Esau? Matter of fact, where Yaakov is expressing his fear and his concern about what's going to happen to him is more when he's talking about meeting Esau than the story which is being told about running away from Lavan. This is where he's afraid. This is where he davens. This is where he prepares, and he does all the preparation to make sure that that is being met with God. So why? The fact that Lavan is mentioned and Esau's story is not mentioned. So you mention only Lavan plus the story of Egypt. It must have been that there is something unique about these two stories, and they are especially related to the time when you say thank you to God when you bring the Bikurim. And that's what we are trying to understand and hopefully come up with an insight this evening at our class. Before I go there, I just want to say that there is other commentaries which don't learn necessarily the way we just read it according to Rashi. In other words, the way Rashi understands is that every part of that verse of the declaration is an expression of thank you and the kindness of God. That's why Rashi says that when it says in the verse, Arami oived ovi, an Aramean would have destroyed our father. So Rashi says, this is referring to Lavan, the Aramean, who sought to eradicate everything when he chased after Jacob. Even though he only thought to do it, God considers it as if he did it, and therefore we have to say thank you for that. The Ibn Ezra, for example, the Ibn Ezra was a famous Sephardic commentator from Spain, a big Chacham and a big Meforesh known as Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra. Same thing is written also by another great commentator of hundreds of years ago from Italy, Rabbi Vadia Sforno, from the city of Sforno. They both say the same thing, not like Rashi. They say that when we say the words Arami, Arami actually refers to Yaakov. Oived means he was lost, Oved. Avi means our father, which means to say, according to their understanding, to the Ibn Ezra and Sforno, that the one who brings the Bikurim wants to actually discuss one and only experience. And this is the exodus from Egypt. But in order to develop a statement which will bring out the great significance of what happened to us coming out of Egypt, it goes back in history and says, let's see what happened before we got to Egypt. Before we got to Egypt, our father Yaakov had run away from Canaan because Esau wanted to kill him. And the mother Rivka told him to better get away. And he went to Haran, which is in Aram. And coming there, Arami, he became the settler of Haran, so of Aram. So Yaakov is now called the Aramean one. Oved with an aleph means he was at a lust. He was at a lust. He had nothing. He was poor. He had garnished. If you remember the story, whatever he had with him was also taken away from him by Esau's son, Eliphaz, who was chasing after Yaakov, and he took everything that Yaakov had. He said, I want to kill you because my father asked me to kill you. And Yaakov finally convinced them not to kill him. And instead, Yaakov did not want Esau to think not to listen to his father. So he persuaded them to take everything that Yaakov has. And by that point, the fact he will become so poor, who will carry the status of a dead person. He told them, your father wants me dead? Great, listen to your father, not a problem. But don't take my life. Take everything I belong, I will be so poor, you can come home and tell dad he's dead. So when Yaakov came to Haran, Oived, says the Ben Ezra, he was lost. He was with nothing. He had no financials. He had no physical privations. He had garnish with them. Obviously, he couldn't have become the father of a new nation in Israel. And then he went to Egypt. Maybe that's it. He's great. No, he couldn't have become either. There was only 70 people. So that's what the person bringing the Bikurim says, that they went through Lavan and he went through Mitzrayim, is again to just emphasize the fact, to stress the fact, how difficult it was in the past, until finally God took us out of Egypt and he made us into the great nation. But we are not thanking God for nothing what happened to Yaakov. That's not the discussion. The thank you is for one and only thing, coming out of Egypt. But in order to magnify the story of Egypt, it's good to know what happened pre-Egypt. What happened to Yaakov before coming down to Egypt. Here he was poor. Here he only had 70 people. So you're basically making a much bigger story when you know how difficult it was in the past, so you can appreciate even greater the future story of the Exodus. This is how Ibn Ezra and Sforno understand this verse. Rashi disagrees with them for a very simple reason. Because Rashi says if the only story is the fact that we came out of Egypt, why does the Torah go on with so much details how difficult it was in Egypt? The fact that you are mentioning the hard work and the years that we spent there with the toiling and laboring tells you that we actually want to thank God, and that what happened in Egypt and coming out of there, and not only describing that we were having a difficult and not able to become a nation. You could have, the verse could have just say, he had 70 kids. With 70 kids, he can build a country. The fact you're going in, that with the 70 kids, he had to work so hard, and they made our life so miserable, and things were so bad and so terrible. That means that we want to talk about their survival. We want to talk about the miracle of Egypt. So in that case, it's not about Yaakov not able to become our father and the founder of Israel. It has to be something that in this story of Bikurim, we actually want to thank God for the miracles that took place in Egypt, and the miracle which took place to Yaakov, how he was rescued with Lavan. And if that's what you are looking to mention, the question is back, why are you discussing only these two miracles and no others? This is the question. I think it's a very clear question which needs explanation. The Rebbe says something very beautiful into this topic. He says as follows: if you go through all the miracles, what happened from the time that we have the miracle, what is the first miracle? Yaakov being saved from Lavan in the country of Aram, and then to Egypt, and then the water, and the manna, and the clouds, and getting safe. Oh, don't forget about getting saved of Amalek, also wanting to attack us, right? And this is right after we came out of Egypt. He was a very difficult enemy, to the point that till today we have a mitzvah to erase his name. We read it in last week's Parsha, the end of last week's Parsha. We can never forget how challenging this Amalek was. You have a mitzvah to erase him. So yes, you have so many miracles. Yet, there is something unique about these two stories, the story of Lavan and the story of Mitzrayim. And this unique kindness is specifically connected to the very special thank you that the one gives while offering bikurim. What is it? The Rebbe says like this. Let's analyze for a moment the mitzvah of bikurim. When does a person bring bikurim? Who is obligated to bring bikurim? If you live in Israel and you don't own land, but you take a drive to the Machna Yehuda market in Jerusalem, which is a big, beautiful market, or Shuka Carmel in Tel Aviv, or any other market, which there are major, beautiful markets, and you buy a number of kilos of great, beautiful looking pomegranates, or figs, or dates, and you're very excited at what you purchased. Are you obligated to bring any bikurim from those fruit that you just purchased? No, you don't. When are you bringing bikurim? Only from that fruit which grew at your personal owned land, and you saw the fruit growing on the tree while you worked so difficultly until it developed into a fruit. So what are we talking about bikurim? Bikurim is not the regular thank you for the give and take of life, so to speak. Bikurim is a thank you which is expressed specifically for enabling to be in a permanent, settled place and having a good life. Something you settled, that's my property. God gave me a piece of land which is mine. I worked it, and I see the fruit of my labor, and I'm excited that finally something grew. I say I'm going to express this excitement by placing this fruit in a basket, bringing it to the temple, introducing it to the Kohen, saying that I am grateful that God brought us to the land that wasn't on my own, and thank you, Hashem, and thanking for the chesed. So what chesed, what kindness are we celebrating when it comes to bikurim? It's the chesed which God took care of us and takes care of us while we are in a settled, permanent place, and we are able to enjoy the fruit of our labor at our home, on something that belongs to us. It's not that I went to the market and I bought some beautiful figs, or somebody gave me a nice gift of a basket of pomegranates. I will say thank you for that too. Obviously, a person, and a Jew especially, always has to say thank you. This is what we are named for, Yehudim, from the word Hoda'ah. We always say thank you. We get up in the morning and we say, Moida'ani lefanecha, I'm thanking you, Hashem. But bikurim is a all different kind of thank you. Today we are concentrating to look on those which we have so-called permanent, and that which we are settled, and there God is kind to us. This is what bikurim is. If this is how we understand what bikurim is, now let's go back and to see the miracles which took place since Yaakov was saved from Laban until we came to the land of Israel. Every miracle, except the two that we mentioned in the beginning, Yaakov being saved from Laban and coming out of Egypt, every miracle what happened to us, every type of chesed that God showed us, was while we were on the road. We weren't settled. The sea was splitting. That wasn't our home where it took place. We were marching towards Israel, and we came across a great challenge. And yes, God saved us. But I'm not here to thank you for what you did to me when I was traveling, when I was being in a temporary condition. We were in the desert, and yes, you provided for us, and you gave us manna, and you gave us water, and you gave us shelter. I'm going to have a special party for that. But this is not Bikurim, because those miracles and those kindness happened to us while we were not settled. We were in a case of travel. We were in a situation of so-called wandering, not even knowing where we're going and how we're going. God saving us from Amalek, we were on the road. God saving us from the Amorite, we were on the road. God protecting us from the Canaanite, we were on the road. From Sichon in Oiksari, we were on the road. Even Yaakov being saved from Esau. Where was Yaakov when Esau is chasing after him? He's on the road. He has no home. He's in between. He left Aram. He's trying to settle in Israel. And the next thing he knows, that he hears that Esau is marching with 400 men to attack him. So he gets afraid. And he was saved, and he was rescued, and everything worked out perfectly. But this is miracles which took place not where he lived, not where he was rested, not where he was settled. Vice versa, when it comes to the story of Lavan and Yaakov, Yaakov lived in Aram 20 years of his life. And during those 20 years, he couldn't provide Bikurim. Not only couldn't provide fruit, he was actually about to be killed by his own father-in-law, Lavan. Things were very challenging. Things were very difficult when what's it called? Ben Yaakov was in his permanent place called Aram. 20 years of his life is a long time. Especially he raised a family there. He had 2 weddings. He had children. He had a whole life in Aram. Yet, there was no Bikurim. He didn't have his own. He was constantly in the fear till the last second of being chased by Lavan. Yes, God saved them. And that's what we are mentioning. Being in a permanent place where Yaakov was, yet in a state of danger, and you, God, rescued them and you showed you kindness to them. That special kindness of somebody who lives in a place and being protected is what we are mentioning at a time when we celebrate Bikurim of bringing something of our permanent homes as a gift to God. Same thing is the second story, coming out of Egypt. We were in Egypt permanently, 200 plus years. That's a long time to live in a country. You become an inhabitant of the country. You become a citizen of the country. You speak their language, you have their customs. You're like an Egyptian at some level. And yet, life was tremendously difficult there. It didn't take much that we would all be eradicated by Paro in his decrees. Baruch Hashem, the miracle happened, and God saved us from the hands of Pharaoh. But we were saved in a place that was home for us. This was Egypt. Says the Rebbe, when it comes to Bikurim, and you want to thank Hashem for what and how kind he was to you at giving you a home, and not like being in the other homes where my life was in such danger and I couldn't have owned anything on my own, like I was in Lavan or the way I was in Mitzrayim. I'm in Eretz Israel, and I have my piece of land, and my own piece of land develops fruit, and I'm able to see the fruit of my labor, and my field is producing, Baruch Hashem, things are working out. Now I remember that there were other times that we were in a permanent, so to speak, place and things were not good. Thank God you saved us at the end. You rescued Yaakov. You rescued Israel from Egypt. But I'm not going to talk about the manna now. This has nothing to do with Bikurim. This is a nice, great thing what happened. But this is all the kind of thing which took place while we were in a state of, like they say, an unnecessary place. It happens to be we were there, but it wasn't our home. I want to tell you, we have a blessing that sometimes maybe not everybody realizes how beautiful the blessing is. We say it a lot of times, but when you read the meaning of the blessing, the way it's in Shulchan Aruch, no major mysteries. You see what this idea is that we actually celebrate with Bikurim. Same idea. I'm referring to specifically to the blessing that we say after we drink water. Not before you drink water. After you drink water, or after you eat a piece of fish, or a piece of steak, no bread, no pasta, no flour. That which has the general blessing she'akol prior to eating or drinking it, also has an after blessing. And what does the after blessing say? Baruch Ato Hashem, blessed are you, God. Elokeinu melech ha'olam, our God, King of the universe. Boirei nefashos rabos. You created a lot of souls. Vechesroinon, and all that which they were lacking and missing, al kol ma shebaroso, le'achayos bohem nefesh kol choy. What is le'achayos bohem? To give livelihood to the soul of all that which is alive. Baruch Olamim. This blessing has two parts of thank yous. We are first thanking God for the fact that Boire Nefashos Rabbos, He created people. The people are lacking certain things, and He provides them with what they are lacking. You need air, He provides you with air. You need shelter, He provides you with shelter. This is all the necessities that you are lacking, and you're thanking God for providing them for you. But then comes a second aspect. The second aspect is le'achayos boem nefesh kol choy. You created certain things that they were not necessary. You only created it and you're giving it to us because you want to give us that extra excitement, that extra pleasure. For example, you enjoy grapes. Does God have to give you grapes? He doesn't have to. He can give you water and sardines, and that's it. You're going to be okay. Why does he have to give you grapes? You enjoy an apple. You enjoy all these extra enjoyments. You can live without. Or God could have said, be without. Bread and water. Make a moitzi, take a cup of water, and you're going to survive. No. He doesn't just allow you to survive. He doesn't only provide for you to ensure that you survive. He doesn't only sustain your existence. He also gives you le'achayos bohem nefesh kol choy. Le'achayot means to give you some extra vitality, some extra energy, some extra excitement that you don't really have without. This is the thank you of Boire Nefashos. A short blessing, but if you read the translation, that's exactly what it says, exactly what it means. And this is really what Bikurim is. There is always what God gives us because He needs to give us. Amalek comes to attack you, He has to save you. He has to. Corona. He has to get us out of it. There's no other choice. He can't leave us stuck like this forever. He has to. He has to save us. He has to split the sea. What else does he want us to do? The Egyptians are behind us. The sea is in front of us. Who else is going to take care of us? He has to. You're in the desert. He has to give you manna. He has to give you water. This is all the thing that he's giving us because he has to give it to us. Becoming to Israel, now it's not anymore what we have to. He's allowing you to become an owner of a piece of land. Do you have to own land? You know, people who lived on rent for all their life. You have to own it, and you have to produce your own fruit. What's wrong with going to the market and buying yourself a few figs? No. Hashem is nice, and he says, I'm not just going to let you stay there. I'm going to give you a home that you're going to own. It's going to become yours. You're going to call your name on it. And you're going to work it and develop it and see the labor of your fruit, and you see the fruit of your labor, and it's all going to be good. That's a special kind of chesed, a special kind of kindness that comes along and together with this very special mitzvah of this parsha called Bikurim. This is Bikurim. Bikurim is not what we are getting so-called by the way, because he has to give it to us, and otherwise we wouldn't survive. Bikurim is a thank you for that which is perhaps even the unnecessary. It could have been different. It didn't have to be this way. You're permanent. You're settled. You're a mensch. Say thank you. Celebrate it. This is what the mitzvah of Bikurim is. And this is really the lesson of this week's parsha. So with this in mind, obviously, as we're getting ready to end of the year, and we are involved in all kinds of things and looking back how the year was, so we can be busy and start complaining. Maybe we should have this, and I was supposed to have this great wedding somewhere in where was it, Karen? In Australia? No, not Australia. Oh, Australia. And somebody else was going to have a wedding in Florida, and somebody else was going to have this big bar mitzvah at the Torah Center. Somebody was going to have this big bar mitzvah, and this big birthday party, and this big yard side party, and this big. You want to complain? Not this parsha. This parsha is about saying thank you. This parsha is about looking for a moment and to see where is that I have on my, God gave me the so-called ability to own something of my own, and it's mine, and I'm Baruch Hashem surviving and being provided while I'm there. This is Bikurim. This is the story of Lavan in Aram. This is the story of Jews coming out of Egypt, and this is, God willing, going to be the story of us coming out of this final gullus and exile, that we are there, that very soon we should be able to look back and say that God was there saving us and watching over us, and we should be able to say thank you in the proper way, like we say on Passover night, we want to thank you with a new song, Al Geulatenu, Val Bdut Nafshenu, on our redemption and on the redemption of our soul. Baruch Ato Hashem, Goal Yisrael. Blessed are you, God, the Redeemer of Israel. And then we're going to drink a second cup of wine. That's what we do every year, Pesach. That's going to be the blessing of thank you, which we're going to have, God willing, very soon. Very soon. Let's be a little more patient, a little bit more. Noch a bissele. A bissele. No, a bissele means a Yiddish mama feeds her child, and the child doesn't want to eat, and he thinks it's over, and the mother said, I don't want to feed you, I just want you to eat. Noch a bissele, a little bit more. And that bissele brings it all together. We should all be patient a little bit more, and we're going to merit to see the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, and bringing the big Bikurim baskets of our all good deeds that we had accomplished in Golus, and be able to make a declaration to Hashem that we did not lose ourselves, we are not ungrateful, and let it be, like I say, speedily in our days. Amen. Thank you. Is somebody going to unmute